For most of the world, Sudan is just a name that appears briefly in news headlines and then disappears again, replaced by the next story. But behind that brief mention lies a tragedy that has shaped the lives of more than 45 million people. It is a story of betrayal, power, and silence. A story of a nation caught between the ambitions of men who promised protection but delivered destruction. This is Sudan's hidden war, and this is what the world is not seeing. To understand what is happening now, we have to look back. Sudan's history has been written in the language of struggle. In 1956, the country achieved independence from British and Egyptian rule. The people celebrated with hope, a hope that their land, rich with culture and resources, would finally belong to them. But independence came with borders drawn by others and deep divisions inside. The North and South were culturally and religiously different, and those divisions would shape every government that followed. For decades, Sudan lived through military coups, civil wars, and broken promises. In 1989, a man named Omar al-Bashir took power through a coup. He ruled for 30 years, using fear and manipulation to hold the country together under his control. His government silenced critics, restricted the press, and relied heavily on tribal loyalties. Under his rule, Sudan became isolated and authoritarian, and ordinary people suffered as the elite grew richer. Bashir's power depended on the loyalty of the military and of militias that carried out his orders. During the war in Darfur in the early 2000s, one such militia gained particular notoriety. The Janjaweed. They burned villages, killed civilians, and spread terror across the region. Their leader, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, known as Hamadeh, would later become one of the most powerful men in the country. His fighters became the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, paramilitary group that would play a central role in the conflict that now tears Sudan apart. By 2018, years of economic mismanagement and corruption had left the country on the brink of collapse. Prices for bread and fuel skyrocketed. Ordinary Sudanese, weary from decades of dictatorship, took to the streets. The protests began small: students, workers, mothers demanding food for their children, but they spread quickly. What started as anger over prices became a movement for freedom. Protesters filled the streets of Khartoum and other cities, chanting for the fall of the regime. Despite beatings, arrests, and killings, they did not stop. And finally, in April 2019, Omar al-Bashir was overthrown. For the first time in decades, the people of Sudan allowed themselves to dream of a new beginning. They wanted democracy, justice, and a government that served its citizens rather than its generals. A transitional council was created, combining civilian leaders and military officers. But peace built on compromise is fragile, especially when the men with the guns still hold most of the power. Among those men were two figures who would soon turn against each other: General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, head of the Sudanese Armed Forces, and Hemedti, the commander of the Rapid Support Forces. On paper, they were allies. Together they promised to guide Sudan toward civilian rule, but trust between them was thin. Burhan represented the old army elite, disciplined, hierarchical, tied to the traditional military structure. Hemedti came from outside that world. He was a self-made commander, a man who rose from camel trader to militia leader, controlling vast networks of soldiers and access to Sudan's lucrative gold mines. His forces had grown into a parallel army, heavily armed, wealthy, and independent of Burhan's command. The uneasy partnership between them began to fracture as the transitional period continued. Civilian groups demanded more say in government. The military resisted. In October 2021, Burhan staged another coup, removing the civilian leadership and placing the army back in full control. Hemedti publicly supported the coup, but behind the scenes, tensions deepened. Both men began preparing for a confrontation they knew was coming. Each believed the other would betray him first. By early 2023, international mediators were urging both generals to integrate the RSF into the national army, a step seen as crucial for stability. But this proposal struck at the heart of their power struggle. Hemedti feared losing his autonomy and the wealth that came from his independent operations. Burhan, meanwhile, saw the RSF's growing strength as a threat to Sudan's sovereignty. The talks failed, and mistrust turned to open hostility. In April 2023, war erupted. The Rapid Support Forces moved quickly, seizing airports, military bases, and parts of Khartoum. The army responded with airstrikes and heavy artillery. Within days, the capital, once a vibrant city of markets, schools, and life, became a battlefield. Civilians fled their homes, hospitals were destroyed, power and water lines were cut, the skies filled with smoke, and the streets with fear. This was not a war of liberation or ideology. It was a war of power between two men and their armies, and it consumed everything around them. The civilian population, already exhausted by years of poverty and political instability, bore the brunt of the violence. In the months that followed, millions were displaced. Towns in Darfur and other regions were attacked again, echoing the horrors of the early 2000s. Ethnic tensions resurfaced, and reports of mass killings and sexual violence spread. The conflict that began in the capital soon engulfed the entire country. The humanitarian consequences have been catastrophic. More than 10 million people have been forced from their homes, one of the largest displacement crises in the world. Food shortages have become severe. Aid organizations struggled to deliver supplies because fighting blocks the roads and looters target convoys. Many hospitals no longer function. Doctors operate without electricity or medicine. Children die from hunger and disease. Entire families live in temporary shelters, surviving on hope and memory. And yet, beyond these human stories lies a deeper question. Why does the world remain so quiet? Sudan's war rarely makes front-page news. Global attention shifts quickly to other crises, and Sudan becomes just another forgotten tragedy. Without sustained international focus, pressure on the warring parties remains weak. Neighboring countries such as Chad, South Sudan, and Egypt receive waves of refugees, but have little capacity to help. Foreign powers with influence over Sudan's generals, countries with economic or military interests issue statements but avoid decisive action. Part of the reason for this silence is that Sudan's conflict does not fit the narratives that drive global attention. There are no clear heroes or villains, no easy alliances for the world's powers. It is a messy internal struggle tied to decades of history, tribal identity, and external manipulation. There are also economic interests at play. Sudan's gold mines, which provide funding to both the army and the RSF, attract foreign buyers. Reports suggest that some of the gold is traded through networks that reach into the Middle East and beyond. As long as there are profits to be made, the incentives for peace remain weak. Inside Sudan, information is scarce. Journalists risk imprisonment, or worse if they try to report. But fragments of the truth still emerge. Videos smuggled out of the country show the scale of destruction, markets reduced to ashes, families searching for missing loved ones, entire neighborhoods abandoned. Survivors describe atrocities, but with communications limited, verification is difficult. Each side accuses the other of war crimes, and both bear responsibility for immense suffering. As the conflict drags on, Sudan's social fabric is tearing apart. Years of displacement and violence have created generational trauma. The young people who led the revolution in 2019, those who dreamed of democracy, now find themselves in exile or in survival mode. The dream of civilian rule seems distant. The power vacuum has created opportunities for extremist groups, criminal networks, and foreign